Hopefully it'll re We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the BYU Management Society's Learn from Professional Initiative. Our goal is to provide guidance to young adults as they explore various careers and looking forward to jumpstarting their career. So today we have the opportunity to hear from Paul Demetter, who has couple of different experiences in his career, right? He started out at Kmart in the operation field and then moved into HR, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then went to Wild Oats as a vice president of human resources and ended his career at Walmart Corporation. And when I say ended his career, he's not done yet, right? You're still teaching an HR class at Portland State. And
Yeah.
probably my favorite thing is he is a published author. How many books have you written since you've retired, Paul?
Oh, seven now.
Seven. Okay. Well, great. Well, welcome and thanks for your time today. So, what made you decide to pursue HR as a career?
That really that was an interesting thing because I never planned it. In fact, I never even really wanted it. And when I started off with Kmart, I was in operations. I was involved with stores and districts and regions and everything else. And then from there, I went to merchandising. And at one point in the home office, a man had stopped by my office while I was on the phone, and he just mentioned to me, "Come up and see me when you're done." I asked my administrative assistant after I hung up the phone who that was, and she said he's a senior director of HR. And I thought, oh, here we go. I'm in trouble about something. And so I went up there, and he offered me a position of director of HR administration for the Kmart Corporation. And I was totally shocked. I had no idea where it came from. I asked him how he even got my name, and he just told me I must have known the right people because the vice president of HR had requested me, and I had worked with him at some point in my career. So anyway, I didn't know a whole lot about HR, and I had to be brought up to speed as quickly as I could. And what I found out, I thought that maybe I wouldn't really enjoy HR, and then I found out I really did have a passion for it and spent a little over 20 years in it. So that's how I got in it, but it wasn't planned. So,
So, what does a HR person do? What do you do on a daily basis? And
I think that's a great question because there's so many avenues. Like a person that goes into business, they don't really know what avenue in business they're going to go into. And in HR, I didn't know really either. In fact, it was assigned to me. And there are generalist roles and there's specialist roles. So anybody that's interested in HR, they should probably have an idea what it is they would like to do. Like a generalist role, for example, HR administration could be something that's really dealing with a lot of associate relations problems and issues. And that is a challenging position because you represent the company and yet you represent the associate. And you have to deal with sometimes terminations and complaints about supervisors and things like that. But it's an important role. And yet there are specialist roles in HR too. There's compensation and benefits and total rewards, talent attraction, HR analytics, and there's a whole slew of specialist positions that if that's what a person likes, if they like developing training materials, for example, that's a different role than HR administration. Policy and procedural development is also a different role. So it just depends. I think a lot of people that go into HR, they don't really know that there are different areas that they can get into. And you can certainly transfer from one area to another too. But normally the entry level role would be something like HR recruiting or possibly HR generalist.
Mhm. So, as a director, your role that you had, was it responsible for all of those items, or was it more of a generalist role?
No, it was so over administration. I didn't really deal with associate relations issues. I was responsible for policy and procedure development for the Kmart Corporation. I was also responsible for record retention. And at that time, the employee records were all in over 2,000 stores across the country. And our responsibility was to bring all the records in-house where we would have them and to eventually digitize them. So it was quite an undertaking to bring all these records to set up a room. There were file cabinets and file cabinets. It was before digital, and to have all these records set up, and then to manage them and handle when terminations, when they had to be separated because of terminations and go to a separate system. And all that had to happen. But there was a lot of policy and procedural development that had to be updated as well. So that was the core of the responsibility. And then thrown in there was relocation, and I was responsible for expat relocation at the time.
And those records, I mean, that must have been tens of thousands.
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was amazing. We started off with the exempt records first, all the management, and then eventually we had to comprise and put together, associate the individual records too. But it was just amazing. It was quite a team to pull that all together.
So what was the thickest file that you had? I mean, are these things like, I would think some of these files would be inches
you know,
thick.
that, I guess it depended on tenure, but yeah, some of the files got pretty thick, and naturally, I reviewed my file when I came in too, just see what's in my file. But no, everything was fine, and normally in the file would be all the hire paperwork and all the performance evaluation paperwork, things like that. There's medical files were separate in the same area but separate. But yeah, it was a lot to pull together.
And it sounds like you were involved somewhat with like terminations. What was the most interesting that you can share termination that you were involved with?
At that point, most of the terminations I was involved in was not store level terminations. It was because I was corporate. It was more involved with corporate terminations, and typically the normal one would be performance related, and
Mhm.
there was a process or a procedure in place that if a person was underperforming, there would be like a verbal warning, two written warnings, and then sometimes it led to termination. Sometimes the problem was resolved, but the complex ones were the ones that involved additional investigation on my part. That could be something like a discrimination, sexual harassment, um, some type of an employer or the supervisor infraction against the employee, and that had to involve an investigation.
Mhm.
And those always took time. When I'd get one of those across my desk, I'm thinking, oh, everything dropped, and I had to concentrate on this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm assuming that some of those with all those warnings went smooth and they understood what was coming, and at other times you probably got an earful that this isn't fair,
Oh,
et cetera, et cetera. So,
oh yeah, you have to give them the opportunity to talk, but when it's a performance-related issue, at that point, the discussion has happened along the way,
mhm.
and I guess the actual handling of the termination goes a little more quickly. The difficult ones, and one of the things I'm going to be teaching at Portland State University is corporate downsizing. What we see a lot today is are downsizing efforts by different companies, normally as a cost-cutting measure, and those are the difficult ones because normally they don't see it coming. If a person has had a performance issue, they've been warned enough times. They know there's been advance notification. But with a workforce reduction or a downsizing effort, those are the difficult messages
Mhm.
because it's not performance based necessarily. Sometimes it's just a strict percentage. We're going to reduce the workforce by 10%. But it was a hard conversation because you're basically catching the person off guard when you're giving them the termination package, and then you're covering all of the critical components that they have in mind, like continuation of benefits, severance plan, and things like that. So that was never the enjoyable. Termination is never enjoyable. Anybody that enjoys terminating people shouldn't be in HR.
Yeah, yeah, no, that doesn't sound like any fun. And it sounds like with Kmart, right, you were kind of there when things like that were probably happening. So
Yeah.
I'm just looking at your resume and stuff, and when Kmart started to have those downsizings. So that must not have been a fun situation. So,
Oh, it was really difficult. The home office at the time, and I'm really wondering how many people that are listening to this even remember Kmart anymore. But at one point, Kmart was the largest retailer in the United States. It had passed Sears. That didn't last long before Walmart passed them. But I'll never forget the one time that we knew there was going to be a downsizing effort at corporate headquarters. Within the corporation headquarters building, there were over 5,000 employees, and we were going to cut around 700 jobs. And it was coming up to the holidays, and of course there was a what we called a war room that is set up. There's no windows in it or anything like that, and it's locked. And because in the war room are org charts and all this information as far as what needs to be cut, because you don't necessarily cut every area in a company the same percentage. Merchandising might have been cut by 7%, where something else like logistics might have been cut by 12%. And so we had to determine exactly where it was going to go. There were a lot of factors that we had to look at too. We had to look at age, we had to look at gender, we had to look at length of service, we had to look at past performance. There was an entire spreadsheet of data that had to be collected to help us to determine what associates wouldn't be able to cut it and continue with the company. So that was probably the most difficult downsizing event I've ever been through, because many of those people I knew and I'd worked with for years.
yeah.
And you would see them in the hall, and you realize that their job is going to be affected, and the impact on it, especially coming into the holiday season. It was a very difficult period of time.
Yeah, I bet. And you probably got a few looks as you're walking down the hall. It's like, oh, there's Paul. He's
They,
making
yeah,
a decision.
they knew something was coming. They just didn't know if they would be involved in it or not.
Yeah.
And nothing's worse than sitting across the desk from a friend as perhaps just the HR representative in the room. The supervisor would handle the termination, but there's always an HR representative in the room too. And they look at you and you look at them, and you've been friends for a long time, and they realize good news isn't coming. And it's really a difficult part of HR.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So was your career like just an upward trajectory, or was it some obstacles that you faced along the way?
You know, there's always obstacles, and rarely anymore do you see a straight upward trajectory, especially with big companies. Smaller companies, you can, but with big companies, there's a lot of lateral moves. And for example, me going into HR at the time, it was a lateral move. It was director to director. I was director of vendor relations in a merchandising environment to director of HR. So there were lateral moves, and lateral moves sometimes are difficult to take, and yet I can understand the importance of them too, because without the lateral moves, I couldn't have become a successful HR person. If I hadn't had experience in store operations and merchandising and logistics and IT and some of these areas, I wouldn't have been as competent as an HR professional as I had to become. And so I was grateful for that. It was never my envisioned career path to go into HR. I wanted to go into merchandising. I wanted to be a buyer and all these things. At one point, I wanted to be in operations and I wanted to be a regional vice president, but that's not the way it ended up. And once I got into HR, I realized, okay, I'm in HR and I need to be committed and I need to be brought up to speed and learn as much as I possibly can and develop myself so I can be successful in it.
Mhm. So it sounds like that prior experience helped. What other advice would you give somebody that's looking to start an HR career?
When I started off with Kmart, I actually started off in store management. So that's manager trainee to assistant manager to manager. The best advice probably in my entire career I received when I was in that role, and that advice was adopt the owner attitude. And as it was explained to me, I started to figure it out, and I used that term so many times in my career. I would walk into a store and evaluate a store in whatever role I was in, And sometimes the store's in good condition, sometimes it isn't. And sometimes I'd have to say to the store manager, if you own this store, would it look like this? If you own the store, would you know the financial figures that I'm asking you about? If you own the store, would you have hired that person? If that person had your name badge on, would you have hired them? So that was probably the very best advice I ever got. If I owned the company, if I owned a store or whatever, would I react any differently than I do normally, or would I just try to hurry and get through, check that box, and move on? So it was excellent advice, and advice I've given to a lot of people since then.
Okay, great. So is there any other, like from a educational requirement, anything that you would recommend? What degree would you get? What other training would you get to become an HR professional?
Well, because I didn't intend to go in HR, my degree was in business management. I had a minor in accounting and a minor in economics, and um, if a person really wants to go in HR, a business degree is good, but so is a communications degree. I mean, there are different degrees. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend if you're going into a medical field that doesn't necessarily have application to HR. But I would say communications, business. There are several degrees that could adapt to it. Statistics. We use statistics a lot in HR. So a math background, any of those types of things. I think the most important thing is a person personable? Can they communicate with others and effectively lead a team?
Okay. So what are some of the other characteristics, the successful people that you dealt with?
Oh man, I actually, some of the things I'd written down, I just want to glance because at it because over the years, over 43 years or whatever it is, there's a lot of lessons learned. And the one important thing is know the business and not just what you do. You can't really be effective in a meeting if you're an HR business partner if you don't know the business. You may know HR, but there are so many acronyms that are involved with everything. And you're sitting in a meeting and you're hearing all these things, and you're hearing ROI and shelf life and all this other stuff, and you don't know what they're talking about. You're hearing about productivity numbers and things like that, and you're basically then more of an observer than a participant. So if you want to be in the meeting, be a participant. Know the language that's being talked about. That probably more than anything was what helped me to get into HR, was because I could sit in a merchandise meeting and I knew the language. I could sit in an operations meeting and I knew the language. And so it really was a help. And then you can become more of a participant. So I would say know the business, but be a participant. Don't be an observer. Um, Hire the very best talent. It may be difficult to interview a lot of people and to choose the best talent, and you may want to hurry, but you never hurry with a hire, because that may be the most important thing you do all year, is the selection of a person to fill a role. Because if you make a mistake on that, it's going to be very difficult to correct the mistake. Another one was never be afraid to concede. And I've dealt with so many people, vice presidents and directors and senior vice presidents and everything else, and they think that because they have a title, they should never concede. Never be afraid to concede. What's the worst that can happen? That you were right and the other person was wrong? So what? Or what? But what would be the best thing that could happen? The other person was right and you were wrong. You learned a lesson and it built their self-esteem. Just know what to concede and what you won't concede. There's matters of integrity and ethics you will not concede. But other things, it can be a growing experience for both people, the person that's recommending something and the person that's making the decision. Um, in HR, the thing is that's difficult. It's a very, very fine line. You represent the company, you represent the employee. It's real easy in HR to basically say, well, this is our policy. That can become a crutch. Know when to say that, okay, you know what, we're going to make a change in this policy because of the issue that you're dealing with. That's one of the things I wrote is don't let policy dictate judgment. Um, be relevant and always strengthen the team. And if you're on a team, you need to be able to participate. So be relevant. And then I think maybe the most important advice I was ever given was to always expand your knowledge. Don't live on yesterday's knowledge. And so many things are changing in the workplace and in everything that we do is always expand your knowledge and be a learner. When I would do a performance evaluation, I would always start off the conversation with, what did you do to develop yourself the past year? And that would catch people off guard. It wasn't intended to catch them off guard, but I wanted to know what they would do because other than that, a performance evaluation is sort of like a report card. It's sort of like a history thing. Well, this is what you did in this area, and this is how I rated you in this area. But I wanted to know, what did they do to develop themselves in the past year? So I guess it's sort of a long answer to a question, but those are some of the key points I think are relevant.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to ask a couple follow-up questions on that, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
agree, right? Trying to hire the right person is very, very important, right? You get the wrong person in there and it can just take so much of your time. But how do
Yeah,
you do that, right? You're sitting across the person, you're interviewing them for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. How do you make that determination in that short amount of time to say, yes, this is a good hire, or we need to do some additional research or whatever it is? How do you do that in a half hour?
that's a hard one. I've made my share of bad hires that I've regretted, and but I've made some absolutely outstanding hires too. People that achieved higher roles than I achieved, and that always feels good. So, uh, boy, I'm going to try to answer this one as best I can. The first lesson I learned was I don't hire somebody like me. I'm already there. I don't need other people just like me. What I want a diverse team, and I want people that can bring me different perspectives. And so I didn't need another me in the group. And so it was when I was in doubt, I would have a second interview. I would have another person interview them too, and then we'd compare notes. After that, if we were still in doubt, I pass. One of the things that, and it may sound trivial, but with every interview, at the end of the interview, I would always say, "What questions do you have for me?" If they didn't have any questions, it automatically went in the rejection pile because they weren't prepared for the interview.
Mhm.
And so they could their their manner of dress, their friendliness, everything could have been high, but if they weren't prepared for the interview, then I didn't need them on the team. So that was an easy one for me to make a final decision. But I think a lot of times when I made a mistake, it was because I was in a hurry to fill a position. And sometimes in my mind, I'd say, oh, anybody's better than nobody. But that's not the case. You just have to have the right person. And so often, if it came down to confusion between two or three people that I would want to hire, I'm going to get another person to interview them, and I want to get their viewpoint too.
Mhm.
It's not a surefire way of success, but it would help me. They would come back and they'd say, "Well, I noticed this about the person that maybe I missed," and so it would help us make the decision. But boy, interviewing and hiring talent is just critical to any company.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. So, what was when you asked them, did they have any questions? What was the best question that you ever received?
Well, I think, a lot of times they don't always understand what they're interviewing for. I would like when they would ask me questions about, so what are the growth expectations of the company? What are you looking for in a person for them to be able to succeed in the position? It's questions like that. There's always questions that can come up that they should be asking. What were the disappointments that you've seen in the last year that the company has made, and how is that being handled? Typical questions are, well, you tell me what the culture of the company is. Well, that's sort of like a check the box question,
Mhm.
and everybody asks that question. But I wanted to ask some I wanted them to ask me some question in depth. It might be like, I noticed that last year that the growth of the company didn't expand. Can you tell me why? That means they've done their homework, or they talk about a financial statement or a financial result, or they ask things that are relevant, like, can you explain what you're doing to increase your customer count in your company? And when they're talking about market share and financials and things like that, they've done their homework. I know what they're doing.
Mhm. Good. Yeah, and I always like questions that get me talking about myself, right? So what books have you read?
Yes,
What are you
yes,
interested in, right? What's been your biggest career success, et cetera? I like those questions.
yes,
Well,
yeah. And there's all kinds of different interviews. I sort of like informal interviews, and yet there are the the easy HR legal approach is a standard interview. Here are the standard questions, and somebody can't say, "Well, they didn't ask me this question," or that or they threw this extra question in on me. So it sort of protects the company where they were thinking that, okay, there has to be parity in the interview questions. That's a little bit too rigid for me, a little bit too formal. As I'm getting to know the person, of course, I'm going to another thing that'll drive me crazy is if I say, okay, take a couple minutes and tell me about yourself. And then 10 minutes later, it's going on and on and on. I'm thinking, oh, I'm never going to get through this interview. And so it's like, be concise, know the important parts, realize that resumes are still used, but I don't spend more than 30 seconds on a resume. I know exactly what I'm looking for. And it's like, it either goes in the reject pile or, okay, I'll look at this later. But we don't spend a lot of time on a resume. We sort of want to see, are there gaps in employment? What's the education of the person? Things like that.
okay, great. So is there any other thing that you could recommend somebody, website, book to read, et cetera, if they're interested in going into HR?
Yes, yes, yes. And I think that's a great question. And Mike, I know you'd sent me just a couple of things to help me hone in on what we were talking about today. There are, first of all, as far as preparation, you can have an undergraduate degree. I recommend an undergraduate degree. And again, whether it's in communications or business or whatever, that doesn't matter that much to me. But I do recommend the undergraduate degree. Once you get into a certain discipline, whether it would be HR, and we're talking about HR today, so we'll concentrate on that. Once you're getting into a certain discipline and you realize that, I really have a passion for numbers. I would like to work in the compensation department. Get get certification for it. There are all kinds of certification out there. There's a Society of Human Resource Management, which is general but specific as well, and you can get certified in that. But there's some other ones that I noted here too. There's the it's called the CCP, the Certification Compensation Professional. I really encourage, if somebody wants to get in compensation, get certified in it. Know how to handle the numbers and what you're looking for. Benefits are they're so difficult to handle because you're normally negotiating with a third party, and you're getting contracts and you're reviewing contracts, and you're always looking at the cost of benefits is going up in every company every year. And in fact, benefits are about 30% of an employee's salary. And so it's not inconsequential. It sometimes is something that is reviewed if downsizing or cost cutting has to occur. What benefits are crucial? What benefits are really not that general for everybody? Could we possibly trim? So that's the benefit piece of it. Statistics, there's statistics certification. One of my sons is in HR and he's in HR analytics. And so he is really involved a lot in the statistical analysis and correlative data. Any data that is not correlative, in my opinion, is sort of unnecessary. And any data that is conflicting is really problematic. If turnover is calculated two different ways, that's really conflicting. That doesn't help anybody. And so there's certification in labor law. So I completed the certification in the Society of Human Resource Management. I completed certification with a company called Langevin in training and development. And that was something I didn't have any experience in prior to going into HR. And then before I knew it, I'm asked to be the senior director of training and development for Kmart. And I'm thinking, I don't even know about this. The people that are reporting to me know more about training and development than I do. So I had to get certified in that. And it really was a tremendous help. So continue the education. That's what's critical. And always make yourself relevant. So um, there was a second part of the question you asked me. I thought on that. Was it about the books?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If there was any
Yeah.
book to read or yeah.
So I am, I love to read, and there's a number of books out there. So I think I highlighted, I don't know, 8 or 9 books here that to me were really, really developmental for me. But there's great authors out there. One of my favorite authors is Dave Ulrich, and he taught at the University of Michigan. He did Tomorrow's HR Management. He did the leadership. I'm sorry, not the leadership. He did the HR value proposition, and with that book, I was flattered because he actually sent me the book before it was published. Sort of in an edited version, and he asked me for my comments on it, and so I was flattered with that. But Dave Ulrich to me is just the preeminent HR specialist. But there's other ones. 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Covey. It was relevant when it was written, and it's still relevant today. Noel Tishy, who I also think taught at the University of Michigan, The Leadership Engine, Executive Presence. Oh my word, that is something that I used to tell people it's hard to define, and yet you recognize it immediately when you see it. So Executive Presence was a very good book. 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. John Maxwell, great author. Sharon, The Leadership Pipeline. Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn by Maxwell. Those are all good books, and I'm sure there's many other books that are being written today that are excellent as well. I would think certainly understanding AI today in the workforce is very, very important. I would have to ask the question: could AI replace HR analytics? And so could AI replace policy and procedural development? So it is important to understand what it can do, what it can't do, and I don't want AI to do my hiring for me.
Mhm.
I don't think I necessarily want AI to do my training and development for me, because there's various areas of training and development. Some is leader led, some of it can be online training. Some of it is classroom. Some of it's one-on-one. I don't think I want AI doing that, but those are just some things to consider before I digress too much, I guess.
Yeah, we could talk about AI all day, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
maybe it won't do the training, but maybe it will help your thought process about the training. Maybe it'll help you prepare some slides, whatever, right?
Yes.
But
Oh yeah.
you don't want it doing the final thing. Well,
Right.
the one thing before we get too far off topic, the one thing that I took away from that more than anything is that your son decided to do HR, right? Which means that you were at least positive enough about your work experience and had a good enough experience that your son picked up on that and says, "Yes, I'll do HR as well," rather than, "Oh, I don't want anything to do with HR," right? That's impressive, Paul, that you had that type of influence on your son.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, actually, I have 2 sons that have their MBA in an HR concentration. One of them is not involved in HR. The other one is. And at the time when they told me that they were going to pursue HR, I said, why? And they said, well, it's been good for you. I said, yeah, but it's not necessarily good for everybody. And I would joke with them. I'd say, do you like dealing with problems? Because you're going to get a lot of them.
Mhm.
And so the one son that is in HR, he's in HR analytics, and oh, he's better than I am with it. He's really good. And the other son, he knew he wanted to get an MBA, but he didn't know what field he wanted to get an MBA in. Don't start something if you don't know exactly what road you're going down. And so he was already in the workforce. He gets an MBA in HR, and he doesn't have an HR position because he doesn't have the background in it. He had advanced so far in his company that to go into HR, you would have to go to an entry level position, which would have been taking a step down. So on the resume, the MBA looks very good, but he's not doing the work that he got the degree in.
Mhm.
But it's not wasted education. It's just he know the focus before you start the position, I guess, or before you start the process.
Okay, good. And then how important is networking in HR, right? How do you do that? How do you network in an HR context?
It's so critical. Networking is so critical. And I've seen people that I think are just fabulous with it. Realize that today, the last statistic I read is that the average person that's going into the workforce environment is going to have something like 5.3 different jobs during their working career. Networking is critical. And one of the best opportunities I ever had is I'm going to go back to the Kmart days again. So I'm working in Kmart Corporation. I'm in the home office, and I'd been asked to head up the training and development for Kmart, not only for the corporation but for over 2,000 stores. And it was a challenging position. And the person that gave me the promotion was a person that had worked for Pepsi. He'd actually worked for the CIA at one point, and he's now a senior vice president in HR. And he knew that I had questions about, okay, how am I going to develop training? Because he wasn't happy with the training. He basically wanted a total rework. And he gave me the opportunity to spend about 3 months going to other companies and partnering with them. Pepsi, Procter and Gamble, General Electric. I was going to all these companies, and I'd spend several days in their training department working with them and making analysis. It was probably the best developmental experience I've ever had working for a company because it was an investment. We already had a partnership with these companies because we were doing business with the Procter and Gambles of the world and General Electric. But I was going into companies like Home Depot too, into their home office, and I was observing and learning so much. I think networking is critical. There was a time, and I can't remember exactly what was occurring, but it was occurring throughout all of retail. And I reached out and I partnered with Target. Well, Target was our competition. And I reached out and I partnered with Walmart. Walmart was our competition. But it was something that was, I wish I could recall exactly what it was now, but it was something that was relevant to all of retail. And what I found out was as long as we're not sharing secrets, company secrets, we can open the door as far as discussing how we want to proceed with something. And so that networking, especially now, because people don't really stay with a company for 30 years, 40 years, whatever it's going to be. And we realize people are going to be jumping. That networking is really important. It can help you in your current job. It can help you get another job. It's so important.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Paul. So to wrap this up, is there any last advice that you would give to a young professional?
Yes. Yeah. It's difficult, starting out. I think I changed my major 3 times. It's difficult knowing what is it you want to do. I would say learn as much as you possibly can about whatever field you're going into. You want to be a teacher, learn about it. You want to go into the medical profession, learn about it. And shadow somebody and partner somebody. My resume going into getting hired to go into a management training program was not a good resume. In the summer months, I'm doing things like working in the factory or I was a truck driver and all these other things, but it wasn't really relevant to the company that I was trying to get into. And I'm seeing that the youth of today are becoming much more prepared. Now I'm seeing where internships are almost mandatory. And I think that's excellent. But prepare yourself on how to interview, know what you want to get into, because you're going to have that interviewer at some point that's going to say, why do you want to join this company? And you don't want to tell them because I need a job. So know exactly what it is. Prepare yourself. Don't be afraid to change. Like I said, I never planned on HR. I planned first I was going to be in operations. I was going to climb to this position. Then I was going to be in merchandising. I was going to climb to this position. Don't be afraid to change. It's going to happen. It's going to develop you. And also know when to change a company. Know when you feel like, okay, this company isn't offering me what I want, or it's not growing the way I want it to grow, or there's going to be some problem there. Don't be afraid to change. It's nice to say, oh, look, I have this 30-year gold watch that was given to me after being with the company. But if you're not happy doing what you're doing, life is too short. And I've had to tell people sometimes that would come up to me and they'd start complaining. And after a while, I'd just say, life's too short. Why are you even here? And they were surprised that I would be blunt like that with them. But it's like, find the thing that you're happy with. Find something that's going to fulfill your life. Because if you look at it, you're going to be spending such a high percentage of that 168 hours a week working for this company or whatever the business is. You might as well do it with a company that you really like or a business that you really like.
Yeah. And
So don't be afraid to
I'd add
don't be
people.
afraid to make a change.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I'd add people that you like to work with, right? I mean, that
Yes.
is part
Yeah.
of the equation as well.
Yep.
So if you want to switch, like you switched, departments or whatever, right? Sometimes that's what it takes. Same company, different department, working with different people, take advantage of those opportunities. So
Exactly. Sometimes you don't even know what's on the other side.
mhm.
And then you join a department, you join a company, and you think, oh man, I wish I would have made this decision a long time ago. And so it's fascinating. The journey is great. Sometimes you don't know the end point of the journey, but the journey along the way is just fantastic. And so Mike, I would I really appreciate this opportunity, and I would help any that have questions anytime I could. I'd always make myself available to them.
We appreciate that, Paul. Yeah, so if you want to do an informational interview with Paul, please reach out to Paul or one of us here at the BYU Management Society, and we can make that happen. If you want to do another informational interview, right, don't hesitate to reach out to your own professional or someone on the BYU Management Society to help make that happen. And to prepare for those informational interviews, we recommend that you watch the video on this website entitled Conducting Informational Interviews. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you, Mike. Take care. Bye bye.